The rain came down like punishment. Not the kind of rain that cools a summer evening or washes the dust off a highway. This was the kind of rain that felt like the sky was trying to drown something. The kind that blurs headlights into white ghosts, turns asphalt into rivers, and makes the world feel like it's ending at 60 miles an hour. Marcus Reaper, Donovan had ridden through worse. 38 years old, 6'2", with hands that had thrown punches in 3 states and repaired engines in every roadside ditch from Nevada to Tennessee. His leather cut, the Hell's Angels patch worn like armor, was soaked through to the lining. The iron eagle on his back blurred in the downpour. His knuckles were tattooed with the words "Hold Fast," a sailor's prayer he'd stolen from a dead man's skin, a story he never told anyone. He was riding alone that night, which was unusual for a man like Marcus. Usually there were brothers behind him, the low thunder of a dozen Harleys cutting through wind, the kind of presence that made highway patrolmen change lanes without a second thought. But tonight, Marcus had needed solitude, the way a wounded animal needs to find a quiet place. He'd buried his road brother Eddie 3 days ago. 41 years old, liver. Nobody talked about it out loud in the club, but everyone knew Eddie had been drinking since he was 14 and the bill had finally come due. Marcus had stood at the grave in his cut and his boots, and he had not cried, not because he didn't feel it, but because the grief sat too deep to surface. It had gone down into the marrow of him, heavy and permanent. So he rode. That's what men like Marcus did with things that couldn't be fixed. They rode until the speed turned the feeling into something manageable, until the engine noise drowned out the voice in the head that said you should have made him stop. He was 3 miles east of Buttonwillow on Highway 58, the flat black heart of California's Central Valley, when his headlights swept across something on the shoulder of the road. He almost didn't see it. In the rain, in the dark, with the wind screaming past his helmet visor, it looked like a pile of clothes at first, a bundle of fabric left by someone cleaning out a car. His brain registered it and moved on, but something, instinct or something older than instinct, made his right hand ease the throttle. He slowed. He looked again. The bundle moved. Marcus pulled to a hard stop on the gravel shoulder, kickstand down before the engine was off. He was moving toward the shape before he'd even processed the decision. His boots hit the wet ground. The rain hammered his shoulders, and when he crouched down beside what he'd seen, the child was maybe 7 years old, small, pale as paper, dressed in clothes that were completely wrong for the weather: thin linen trousers, a white button-down shirt, dress shoes that had come half off one foot. He was lying on his side in the gravel and wet grass, curled into himself, shaking so badly that Marcus could feel the vibration of it before he even touched him. His lips were blue. There was blood matted in his dark hair above his left ear. Marcus's jaw locked. His whole body went still with the particular stillness of a man who has seen bad things and is processing another one. He pressed 2 fingers to the boy's neck and felt a pulse, thin, fast, barely there, like a bird's heartbeat. "Hey," Marcus said. His voice came out rough, unintended. "Hey, kid, look at me." The boy's eyes opened. Dark brown, glassy with shock, pupils uneven. Marcus had seen enough bar fights and wrecks to know what a head injury looked like. The child stared up at him, and Marcus saw something pass through his expression, fear first, sharp and pure, the flinch of someone who had learned that large men meant danger. But then something else, something like the last reservoir of hope in a person who has run out of everything else. The boy's mouth moved. Marcus leaned in closer, rain pouring off the brim of his helmet. "They left me," the boy whispered. "They left me on purpose." Then his eyes rolled back, and he went limp. What the boy whispered before passing out changed everything. Marcus Donovan did not hesitate. He stripped off his leather cut, that patch he'd bled for, fought for, that represented the single most important identity he'd carried for 20 years, and he wrapped it around the child. Not because he'd thought about it, because his body made the decision before his brain had a vote. He scooped the boy off the wet gravel with both arms, stood up into the rain, and walked back to the bike. There was a roadhouse diner called Sal's 4 miles east. He'd been through it 100 times. He knew it would be open. He knew the woman who owned it, a hard-faced 60-year-old named Dolores who kept a medical kit behind the counter because she'd been married to a trucker for 30 years and knew what the highway gave back. Marcus balanced the boy across the tank in front of him, one arm locked around the child, and rode. 4 minutes later, he kicked through the door of Sal's with the boy in his arms. Dolores took one look at the situation, turned to the 3 truckers at the counter and said, "Get out or get useful." All 3 got useful. She had the boy laid out on the largest booth within 60 seconds, warm towels, the medical kit, a penlight she used to check his pupils still uneven, which made her jaw tighten. She'd seen enough emergency situations to know what that meant. "He needs a hospital," she said. "I know," Marcus said, "but I need you to stabilize him first. If I walk into an ER looking like me carrying a kid who looks like that, the first call they make is to the cops, not a doctor." Dolores looked at him for a moment. She had known Marcus for 11 years. She knew what he was and she knew what he wasn't. She'd watched him once in this very diner quietly pay the tab of a young mother sitting alone with 3 kids and an empty wallet, and then walk out before she could turn around to thank him. "What happened to him?" she asked. "Found him on the 58, 3 miles west. He was laid out in the gravel." Marcus paused. "He said they left him on purpose." Dolores's hand stopped moving for exactly 1 second. Then she went back to work. The boy's temperature was critically low. The cut on his scalp was shallow but had bled freely. The head trauma was the concern, one pupil significantly more dilated than the other, which in the medical field is not a casual observation. It's a flag. "He goes to Kern Medical," Marcus said. "But I drive him, not an ambulance. I need to know he gets there." "Why?" Dolores asked, looking up at him with eyes that had long since stopped being surprised by anything. Marcus looked at the boy. The child was breathing now, color starting to return to his cheeks thanks to the warmth and the dry clothes one of the truckers had donated from his own bag. Peaceful for this moment. Small. Impossibly small. "Because someone put him out there," Marcus said quietly. "And until I know who, he stays with someone who won't hand him back." Kern Medical Center accepted the child at 11:47 p.m. Marcus sat in the waiting room for 6 hours in his soaked clothes, the stares of nurses and staff bouncing off him like they always did. A man built the way Marcus was built, with ink running from collar to wrist bone, and a face that had been rearranged twice by circumstances, doesn't blend into a hospital waiting room. He sat in the plastic chair and he didn't move and he waited, and the waiting room gave him a wide berth. At 5:15 a.m., a young resident named Dr. Ewan came out and found him. "You brought in the boy?" she asked. "Yes." She sat down across from him, looked at him carefully the way doctors learn to look at people. "He's stable. The cranial pressure was elevated. We were monitoring for a subdural hematoma, but the latest scan is looking better. He's going to need rest and observation, but the prognosis is good." She paused. "Mr. Donovan." "Mr. Donovan. The boy hasn't given us a name. He's awake, but he won't tell us his name, his parents' names, his address. Nothing." She held his gaze. "He did ask about you, though." Marcus said nothing. He asked if the man with the eagle was still there. Marcus stood up. The boy was sitting up in the hospital bed, looking impossibly small against the white sheets, when Marcus came through the door. The leather cut was folded on the bedside table, cleaned by a nurse, the Hell's Angels patch catching the fluorescent light. The boy looked at Marcus, and the fear did not come back to his eyes the way Marcus had expected. Instead, the boy said, "You have a lot of tattoos." Marcus pulled the chair close and sat down. "Yeah." "What's the eagle mean?" It means I belong to something. The boy considered this with the gravity that only a child can give to a stranger's answer. I don't belong to anything anymore, he said. My mom is gone. The word gone sat in the air between them. Marcus leaned forward, forearms on his knees. What's your name? A long pause, then softly, Eli. Eli, I'm Marcus. He did not say Reaper. The nickname felt wrong in this room beside this boy. Where's your dad, Eli? The child's face did something complicated. Fear moved through it, but not the way it moved through a child who was merely scared of a parent. This was a different architecture of fear, layered, old for his age, the fear of a kid who has learned that certain questions are dangerous. My dad is in prison, Eli said. They said he did something, but he didn't. How do you know he didn't? The boy looked at Marcus with eyes that were far too serious for a 7-year-old. Because I was there, he said. I saw what really happened. The words landed quietly, but Marcus had been in enough rooms where the truth was spoken to recognize it when he heard it. He sat back in his chair and looked at this small, battered boy who had been left for dead on a highway in a rainstorm, and he felt something shift in his chest. Something that had been locked for a long time. Something that had a name he hadn't used in years. Responsibility. Who left you on the road, Eli? The boy pulled the blanket up around himself. He looked at the window, at the gray California dawn pressing against the glass. The man in the black car, he said, Mr. Hartwell's man. And then the name landed in the room like a stone, dropped into still water. Hartwell. Even Marcus, who did not own a television and read nothing but motorcycle manuals and the occasional newspaper, knew that name. Richard Hartwell, 56 years old, net worth estimated at somewhere between $6 and $9 billion depending on who you asked and what year the market was having. Founder of Hartwell Global, a logistics and infrastructure conglomerate with contracts in 17 countries, and a defense subsidiary that the government preferred not to discuss at press conferences. Former face of 3 charitable foundations. A man whose photograph had appeared on the cover of Forbes magazine twice, and who had given a TED Talk about ethical capitalism that had 40 million views. A man so clean, so polished, so monumentally respectable that even saying his name in connection with a boy on a highway felt absurd. But Eli wasn't saying it with the casual ease of a child who didn't understand weight. He said it the way someone says the name of a thing they're afraid of. He said it like a curse. Tell me about Mr. Hartwell, Marcus said quietly. Eli shook his head. The fear had come back now, full and pressing. I can't. You already did, Marcus said. The man in the black car, Hartwell's man, you told me that much. He kept his voice level, unhurried, the way he talked to a spooked animal. You don't have to tell me everything right now, but you should know I'm not going anywhere. The boy looked at him. Why not? Marcus thought about Eddie. He thought about the grave 3 days ago, the weight of unfinished things. He thought about all the times in his life he'd ridden past something because it wasn't his problem, and the shape of the regret those choices had left behind. Because someone should have been there for you, he said, and wasn't, so now I am. Eli stared at him for a long time. Then he reached out slowly, the way children do when they're testing something, and put his small hand on top of Marcus's massive tattooed one. His fingers barely covered 2 of Marcus's knuckles. Okay, the boy said, okay. The hospital was required to report an unaccompanied minor. Marcus had known that. He'd been thinking about it all night. By 8 a.m., a social worker named Patricia came to the room. She was professional, careful, good at her job. She asked Eli gentle questions and wrote down his answers on a clipboard. She looked at Marcus with the measured assessment of someone trained to read a room. She asked Marcus to step outside. In the hallway, she spoke quietly. He won't give us a surname. He says his mother is gone and his father is in prison and that he came here with you. She looked at Marcus directly. "Do you know this child, Mr. Donovan? I found him on the 58 last night, left in the rain, head injury, hypothermia. Do you know who his family is?" He mentioned a name, Hartwell. Patricia's pen paused on the clipboard, an almost imperceptible pause. Then she wrote something down. "I'll need to make some calls," she said. "Before you do," Marcus said, keeping his voice level, "I want you to know something. That kid was left on a highway in a rainstorm, intentionally. He told me so himself. Whoever did that, if you call the wrong person, he might end up back with them." Patricia met his eyes. She was not a naive woman. She had seen enough child welfare cases to know that the most dangerous place for some children was their own family. "I appreciate your concern," she said carefully. "I'm not being concerned," Marcus said. "I'm telling you a fact. Look into how he ended up on that highway before you pick up the phone, please." She looked at him for a long moment. "You can go back in," she said, "for now." Marcus's phone rang at 10 that morning. He didn't recognize the number, but he answered it because he answered everything. He'd learned long ago that unknown numbers were either nothing or something important, and you didn't find out which by not answering. "Mr. Donovan." The voice on the other end was male, measured, educated, the voice of someone who managed other people for a living. "My name is Daniel Cross. I represent the Hartwell family. I understand you found a child last night." Marcus said nothing. He walked to the window of the waiting room, watching the parking lot below. He was looking for black vehicles. "We're very grateful," Cross continued into the silence. "Eli is a ward of the Hartwell family. His mother was employed by Mr. Hartwell, and after her unfortunate passing, Mr. Hartwell took responsibility for the boy's care. We'd like to arrange to pick him up." "Unfortunate passing," Marcus said. "What happened to her?" A car accident, tragic situation. Now, if you could tell us which facility." "How did you know it was a boy?" Another beat, longer this time. "I'm sorry." "I said, how did you know it was a boy? I didn't tell you it was a boy. All you had was my name and a call from a hospital that reported an unaccompanied minor. They don't release identifying information over the phone." Marcus kept his voice flat and conversational, the way he talked when he was the most serious. "So how did you know?" The voice on the other end changed. The professional courtesy drained out of it. What replaced it was something colder, more efficient. "Mr. Donovan, you seem like a practical man, so I'll be practical with you. Eli is a very important child to a very important family. You've been helpful in bringing him to safety, and I imagine that's where you'd like the story to end." "Is that a suggestion," Marcus said, "or a warning?" "Mr. Donovan." He ended the call, looked at his phone for a moment, then called a number he knew by heart. It rang twice. "Yeah," said the voice on the other end. "Ghost," Marcus said, "I need you." Ghost's real name was Jerome Kellerman. He was 44 years old, weighed 160 soaking wet, and had exactly one skill that mattered outside of writing. He was the most accomplished hacker Marcus had ever encountered, a man who had once told Marcus, without bragging, that he could access the financial records of a Fortune 500 company in the time it took Marcus to finish a cup of coffee. He was also a full-patch member of the club, a brother. "Talk," Ghost said. Marcus talked. By noon, Marcus had made 3 more calls. By 2 in the afternoon, a gray pickup truck had arrived in the hospital parking lot, driven by a man named Decker, 6'4", chest like a barrel, face like a cliff face in winter. He was the club's sergeant-at-arms and the second most intimidating man Marcus had ever met. He didn't ask many questions. He'd heard enough from Marcus's tone of voice to know what kind of situation this was. Decker sat in the parking lot. That was all. He just sat there. But the black SUV that had appeared across the street at 11 a.m. moved after Decker arrived, moved to a different position, but it didn't leave. Marcus stood by Eli's bed, and looked at the boy eating a hospital lunch with the focused determination of a child who hadn't eaten in a very long time. "Where are they taking you?" Eli asked, not looking up from his food. "Nobody's taking me anywhere. I'm right here." "But the lady said someone was coming to get me." Eli's spoon stopped moving. "She made phone calls." Marcus sat down. "Eli, I'm going to ask you something and I need you to tell me the truth. Can you do that?" The boy looked at him. He had very serious eyes for a 7-year-old, the kind of eyes that had seen things. "What happened to your mother?" Eli put down his spoon. He pulled the blanket up around his arms the way he had before when he needed to feel contained. He stared at the blanket for a moment. "She had a car accident," he said. "That's what they told me. But the night before she was scared. She told me to remember something. She made me say it back to her 3 times. He looked at Marcus. "She said that if something happened to her, I needed to find someone to tell, someone who wasn't part of Hartwell's world." "What did she make you remember?" The boy's jaw set with a stubbornness that was startling on such a young face. "She said I could only tell it to someone I trusted, really trusted." Marcus nodded. "That's smart. Your mom was smart." "She was," Eli said. And then, because he was 7 and the grief was enormous and he'd been holding it alone for too long, his eyes filled with tears that he refused to let fall. "She was really smart." Marcus reached out and put his hand on the boy's shoulder. Gently, carefully, the way he'd never been touched as a kid but somehow still knew how to offer. "You don't have to tell me yet," he said. "You tell me when you're ready." The boy nodded. Then, after a moment, "Can you stay just for a while?" "Yeah," Marcus said. "I can stay." Ghost called back at 4 p.m. "Okay," he said, in the clipped tone he used when he'd found things he hadn't expected to find. Eli's mother, her name was Serena Voss. She worked for Hartwell Global as an internal auditor for 6 years, which means she had access to financial records, contract data, all of it. Ghost paused. "She died 11 days ago. Car accident on Route 46 near Paso Robles. Single vehicle crash. Official report says she lost control in the rain." "It wasn't raining 11 days ago," Marcus said. "No," Ghost said. "It wasn't, but the report says it was. Weather records from the NWS don't match the police report." Another pause. "Marcus, she'd been looking at something. Before she died, she accessed a section of Hartwell's internal financial system that she had no authorization to access. Someone noticed. Someone flagged it 3 days before she died." Marcus sat with that information. "What was she looking at?" he asked. "I don't know yet. The files are gone, deleted not just from the system but the backups, professional deletion, the kind that costs money." Ghost's voice dropped. "But here's the thing. Deletion leaves a shape, like taking a piece out of a puzzle. You can see where something used to be, even if you can't see what it was. And the shape of what was deleted from Hartwell's financial records." He trailed off. "Ghost. It's big, Marcus. I don't know what it is yet, but it's enormous. We're talking about transactions that were never reported, contracts that don't exist in any public filing, money moving to accounts in 4 different jurisdictions. This isn't just fraud. This is the kind of thing that ends companies, ends people." He paused again. "She found it, and then she died, and now someone tried to kill her kid." Marcus was standing very still in the hospital corridor. "Find the shape," he said. "Fill it in, whatever resources you need." "I'll need Priest." Priest was another club member, former NSA, which nobody asked him about directly. He had hardware at his house that technically required a federal license to own. He'd never mentioned this and the club had never asked. "Call him," Marcus said. "Tell him it's for me." That evening, 2 things happened almost simultaneously. The first, Patricia the social worker came back to the room with a man in a suit whom she introduced as Thomas Reed, a child welfare coordinator from the county. Reed was smooth, polished, the kind of official who had spent years developing a face that communicated reassurance without committing to anything. He spoke kindly to Eli. He smiled at Marcus, and his eyes were wrong. Not the eyes of someone concerned about a child's welfare, the eyes of someone completing a task. "We've made contact with Mr. Hartwell's representatives," Reed said to Marcus. "They've confirmed Eli's status as a dependent of the Hartwell household, and arrangements are being made for his return." "His return," Marcus said, "to the household of the person who had him left on a highway." Reed's smile remained exactly where it was. "I understand your concern, Mr. Donovan, but the official determination—" "Who called you?" Marcus said. "Who specifically called your office to set this up?" The smile faltered by about 3%. "I received a call from the county director." "And who called the county director?" Reed looked at Patricia. Patricia looked at her clipboard. Neither of them answered. "Right," Marcus said. He looked at Eli, who was watching all of this with the still, careful attention of a child who had learned to read adult conversations for hidden meaning. "Eli and I are going to take a walk." "Mr. Donovan, I don't think." Marcus stood up to his full height. He looked at Thomas Reed. And Thomas Reed, who was a fairly large man himself, who had a government ID and the weight of institutional authority behind him, took a very small, unconscious step backward. "We're going to take a walk," Marcus said again. "And when we come back, I'd like you to have a conversation with me about why the weather records from 11 days ago don't match the police report on Serena Voss's death." He watched Reed's face carefully. "You know that name, don't you?" It wasn't a question, and the micro-expression that moved across Reed's face in the half-second before he reassembled his composure was the only answer Marcus needed. The second thing that happened, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Decker. "3 vehicles now, 2 SUVs and a sedan, all dark, all watching. They're not cops." Marcus got Eli out of the hospital at 7:43 p.m. Not in the dramatic, crashing through doors way that stories sometimes go. He got him out quietly, the way Marcus had learned to do most things, efficiently, without announcement, in a way that was complete before anyone realized it had started. He'd called ahead to Dolores. She had a cousin who worked admin at the hospital, which was information Marcus had filed away years ago and never expected to use. The cousin walked Marcus and Eli out through the loading dock, past the linen carts and the food service delivery trucks, and into the kitchen parking lot where nobody was watching because everyone was watching the front. Decker was waiting. Eli climbed into the back of the gray truck without being told twice. Marcus got in beside him. Decker drove. The 3 dark vehicles out front sat unaware for approximately 4 minutes, and then, somewhere, someone's phone rang. By then, they were on the 99 heading north. "Where are we going?" Eli asked. "Somewhere safe," Marcus said. "How do you know it's safe?" "Because the people there are my people." The boy thought about this. Outside the window, the Central Valley rolled past in the dark, flat and enormous under a sky that had finally cleared after the previous night's storm. "Are your people scary?" Eli asked. "Some of them," Marcus said honestly, "but not to you." The club's Sacramento chapter had a compound on the outskirts of the city that from the outside looked like an auto repair shop and a storage facility, and was, in fact, both of those things and also a great deal more. It had been established in 1987 and had weathered 3 federal investigations and 2 rival club conflicts and an arson attempt, and was still standing, which said something about its foundations. Marcus arrived at midnight. The chapter president was a man named Clint Harrow, 52 years old, gray-bearded, with the bearing of a retired general, and the eyes of someone who had been around long enough to not be surprised by much. He met Marcus in the yard. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the truck. He looked at Eli, who was peering out the window with wide eyes at the compound lights and the bikes lined up in the garage. "You brought me a kid," Clint said. "I brought you a situation," Marcus said. "The kid came with it." They talked for 40 minutes. Marcus laid out everything Ghost had found, everything the boy had said, the calls from Hartwell's people, the hospital visit from Reed, the surveillance vehicles. Clint listened without interrupting, which was his gift, an absolute stillness of attention that made men tell him things they hadn't planned to. When Marcus finished, Clint was quiet for a long moment. "Hartwell," he said. "Yeah. You know what you're poking at." "Yeah." Another silence. Then the boy's mother. She found financial records. "Shape of them," Marcus said. "Ghost's still working on the content. But enough to know it's serious. Enough to know she's dead for finding it." Clint looked at the truck again. Eli had fallen asleep against the window, his breath fogging the glass, his small face slack and peaceful in sleep. "He's got nobody," Clint said. "He's got me," Marcus said, "for now." Clint looked at him for a long time. There was something in his expression that Marcus recognized, the same look Eddie used to give him sometimes, the look that said, "I see you more clearly than you see yourself." "Room's in the back," Clint said finally. "My wife'll set up the small one for the boy. You know where the other room is." He started walking toward the main building, then stopped. "Marcus." "Yeah. Whatever's in those files, if it's what it sounds like, Hartwell's people won't stop. You know that." "Yeah," Marcus said, "I know." Clint nodded. "Then we do this together, club decision. You're not alone in this." He paused. "You never should have been, but that's a different conversation." The next 3 days were a strange, suspended kind of time. Eli slept for nearly 14 hours the first night. He woke and ate and was quiet and watchful, absorbing the compound with the methodical attention of a child mapping a new environment and calculating its dangers and safeties. The club members gave him space, which turned out to be exactly the right instinct. A man named Torch, large, tattooed, with the gentlest voice in the club, discovered that Eli was interested in engines and spent an entire afternoon showing him the inside of a shovel head he was rebuilding. Eli asked questions that were surprisingly informed. Torch reported back to Marcus with something approaching wonder. "Kid knows what a camshaft is," Torch said. "Where'd he learn that?" "His mother's car, maybe," Marcus said. "Or maybe he's just the kind of kid who pays attention." Ghost and Priest were working around the clock. By the second day, the shape of what Serena Voss had found was beginning to fill in. It started with a subsidiary. Hartwell Global had dozens of them, companies within companies, shells and holding entities that were standard corporate architecture for a conglomerate of that size. One of them, incorporated in Delaware with registered agents in the Cayman Islands, had received transfers from Hartwell's defense subsidiary totaling approximately $340 million over 6 years. The transfers were described in internal documents as infrastructure consulting fees. There was no corresponding infrastructure, no contracts, no deliverables, no consulting firm that could be identified. The money had moved again from that entity into a cascade of accounts in jurisdictions that specialized in financial opacity. Ghost had managed to trace some of it, not all, not yet, but enough to accounts connected to 2 defense contractors and a foreign government official whose name appeared on a sanctions watch list. She wasn't just looking at fraud, Ghost told Marcus over the phone. She'd found evidence of illegal payments to a sanctioned foreign national, possibly defense contract manipulation. This is Marcus. This is federal. This is the kind of thing that doesn't just end a company. This gets people sent to prison for the rest of their lives. Hartwell included, Marcus said. If he knew about it, which if it's coming from his defense subsidiary he almost certainly did. Ghost paused. She was going to take it somewhere, that's why she was scared. She was building a case. And someone killed her for it. Yes. And tried to kill the boy. Because Eli was there, Ghost said. When she died, he saw something. Marcus, if he saw something, if he can testify to something, he's not just a loose end. He's a witness. Marcus sat with that, in the silence of the compound night. "Get me documentation," he said. "Everything you've reconstructed, everything provable. I want it somewhere safe, not on any of our systems. I can encrypt it and split it across 3 cold storage drives," Ghost said. "Do it, and Ghost, make a copy for a journalist." A pause. "Which journalist?" "Find me someone who covers financial crime, someone with a record of not being bought." The call came on the morning of the 4th day. Not from Hartwell's people this time. From a different number, unknown, untraceable. Marcus answered it in the yard, watching the sun rise over the compound fence. "Mr. Donovan." The voice was older, tired, with the cadence of someone choosing every word with great care. "My name is Walter Voss. Serena was my daughter." Marcus stopped walking. "Mr. Voss," he said, "I've been trying to find Eli since they told me about Serena." The old man's voice cracked fractionally. "The people at Hartwell's office kept telling me the boy was being cared for, that he was safe, that I'd be able to see him when things were arranged. I kept calling. They kept not calling back." He paused. "Then I got a call from a nurse at Kern Medical. She said a man named Donovan had brought the boy in. She wasn't supposed to call me. She did anyway. She said she thought something wasn't right." "Mr. Voss, how did you get this number?" "I have a friend who knows how to find things," Voss said. "I'm 71 years old and I don't have much patience left for the ways powerful people protect themselves. I want my grandson." Marcus thought for a moment. "Where are you?" "I'm in Bakersfield. I've been in Bakersfield for 4 days waiting for someone to tell me something true." "Can you get to Sacramento?" "Yes." "Don't tell anyone where you're going. No calls from your regular phone after this. Use a different number, buy a prepaid if you have to." Marcus paused. "Eli's safe. He's here. He's okay." He heard the old man make a sound that was not quite a word, just the sound of something enormous releasing. "Thank you," Walter Voss said, in a voice barely above a whisper. "Don't thank me yet," Marcus said. But here is where the story turned. Here is where the shape of things that Marcus had assumed began to reveal itself as something different. Something that would restructure everything he thought he understood about what was happening. Ghost called at 11 that morning. His voice was different, tighter, with an edge Marcus had rarely heard in it. "I found something," he said, "about Hartwell's defense subsidiary, the man who ran it, the subsidiary director, the one who would have authorized those payments." "Yeah." "His name was James Carver. He was pushed out of the company 8 months ago, officially resigned to pursue other opportunities. But the internal communications I pulled, he was pushed. Hard. There were emails, letters, a paper trail of someone systematically isolating him from the company." Ghost paused. "Marcus, Carver is in federal prison. He was arrested 6 months ago on charges of financial fraud and illegal arms dealing. He's serving a 12-year sentence." Marcus said nothing for a moment. "You're saying Hartwell sacrificed him?" "I'm saying someone made sure Carver took the fall for everything. And Carver, here's the thing. Carver has been trying to talk. His lawyers have been filing motions, requesting meetings with federal prosecutors, claiming he has evidence that implicates someone higher in the chain. But the requests keep getting delayed, procedural obstacles. The assigned prosecutor was replaced twice. It's been 8 months and no one has heard his testimony." Ghost stopped. "Then, Marcus, Carver is Eli's father." The world went very quiet. "Say that again," Marcus said. "James Carver is Eli's biological father. He and Serena Voss were together for 2 years before they separated. Eli was born while Carver was working for Hartwell's subsidiary, a beat. Serena found the financial records. Carver knew about them. He might have been the one who originally flagged them to Serena. But before he could act, before either of them could take it anywhere, Hartwell's people moved. They arrested Carver on charges that were designed to bury him. They killed Serena. And then they tried to kill the boy." Marcus stood in the middle of the compound yard, very still, the phone pressed to his ear. They put the father in prison, he said slowly. They killed the mother and they tried to kill the child. He paused. To protect what? To protect Richard Hartwell, Ghost said. Because the money, the 340 million, it doesn't trace back to the subsidiary alone. Marcus, I found one more layer. The transfers at the top originate from accounts held in Hartwell's personal name, his private accounts. This was his operation. Carver was his instrument. And when it was going to come out, Hartwell burned everyone who knew. And then Ghost said the thing that made the entire story shift on its axis. There's one more thing about you. Marcus frowned. About me. The accounts that received the initial transfers, before they went to the subsidiary. One of them, a small one, a pass-through account used for about 8 months in 2019, traces to a holding company. And that holding company is registered to a man named Thomas Donovan. The name hit Marcus like a physical thing. Thomas Donovan, his father. His father, who had died in 2020 in what the official record called a bar fight gone wrong. His father, from whom Marcus had been estranged for most of his adult life. His father, a man he had long ago categorized as reckless and unreliable and connected to people he shouldn't be connected to. Are you sure? Marcus asked. Yes, Ghost said, I'm sure. Marcus sat down on the nearest surface, which happened to be the fender of a parked Harley. He sat on it and looked at the sky for a long moment. His father, Hartwell, the money, the subsidiary, the dead woman, the imprisoned man, the 7-year-old boy who had been left in the rain. All of it connected, all of it going back further than Marcus had known. And the biker who had found the boy by the highway, it had not been entirely random, had it? The threads of this story had been woven long before that night. Ghost, he said, how far back does this go? I don't know yet, Ghost said, but I think further than we want to find out. Walter Voss arrived at the compound at 3 in the afternoon. He was a small man, 71 as he'd said, with white hair and the weathered face of someone who had lived outdoors for significant portions of his life. He had the look of a man from whom a great deal had recently been taken. He walked through the compound gate with the careful dignity of someone who is refusing to be broken. When Eli saw his grandfather from across the yard, the boy went completely still. Then he ran. Walter Voss caught him and held him, and the two of them were locked together for a long time, while the men of the compound found reasons to look in other directions. Because there are some moments that don't need witnesses. Marcus watched from the doorway of the garage. He felt something move in him that he hadn't expected, a grief that was not entirely about other people. He was thinking about his own father, about Thomas Donovan, about a man he'd spent 20 years dismissing as a failure and a danger, about what it meant that this man's name was now woven into the middle of this story, about what it meant that Marcus had found this particular boy on this particular night. He was not a man who believed in fate. He was a man who believed in mechanics, in causes and effects, in the physics of events. But standing in the compound doorway watching an old man hold his grandson, he felt the strange weight of things that could not be explained by pure mechanics. Later, when Eli had settled and Walter was seated at a table with coffee, Marcus sat across from him. I need to tell you something, Marcus said, about what your daughter found and about what it means. Voss nodded. His eyes were red, but his expression was steady. She found evidence of a crime, Marcus said, a serious one. The man whose company she worked for, he used a network of people, including Eli's father, to run payments to a sanctioned foreign official. Defense contract fraud, hundreds of millions of dollars. He paused. When she found the evidence, they killed her. When Carver tried to testify, they buried his case. And when they realized Eli might know something, they tried to kill a 7-year-old, Voss said. His voice was very quiet. Yes. Walter Voss set down his coffee cup. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Marcus. My daughter was the most honest person I ever knew, he said. She got it from her mother. Her mother used to say that honesty wasn't a virtue, it was a compulsion. You couldn't turn it off even when you wanted to. He paused. Serena knew what she was risking. She knew, and she did it anyway. He looked at Marcus with something that was part grief and part something harder and colder. I want the man who killed her to go to prison for it. I want that too, Marcus said. Can you make that happen? Marcus thought about Ghost and Priest, about the documentation being compiled, about the journalist's name he didn't yet have. He thought about a federal prosecutor in a prison case that kept getting delayed. He thought about Eli, sleeping in the back room, carrying a piece of information his mother had made him memorize 3 times. I think so, he said, but Eli is going to have to tell us what he knows, what Serena made him remember, when he's ready. Voss nodded. Don't push him. I won't. The push came from the outside instead. On the 5th day, 3 things happened. The first, a black SUV drove past the compound twice in 1 hour. Slowly. The license plate came back registered to a shell company in Nevada that traced, 2 shells deep, to a security firm with ties to Hartwell Global. The second, Marcus received a text from an unknown number that contained a single sentence and a photograph. The photograph was of the parking lot of a diner in Sacramento. Marcus's bike was in the shot, and so was the gray truck, which meant someone had been watching them arrive. The sentence read, "The boy's well-being depends on your discretion." The third, Ghost called to say that his apartment had been broken into. Nothing stolen, but his secondary workstation, the one that didn't hold the Hartwell files but whose existence indicated Ghost was working on something serious, had been photographed. Someone had left a coffee cup on the desk that hadn't been there before. A message. They know what we're doing, Marcus texted Clint. Yes, Clint texted back, which means we go faster. Marcus found Eli in the garage that evening, sitting on an overturned bucket watching torch work on the shovelhead. The two of them had developed a wordless companionship that Marcus found unexpectedly moving. The enormous tattooed biker and the small, serious boy, passing wrenches back and forth in an easy silence. Marcus sat down next to Eli. Your grandpa tells me your mom taught you to remember something, he said. Something important. Eli kept his eyes on the engine. His hands were still. She said you could only tell it to someone you trusted, Marcus said. I know I haven't known you long, and I know I'm not exactly. He looked down at his hands, at the hold-fast tattoo, at the scars and the ink. I know I'm not the person your mom probably imagined you'd end up with. Eli was quiet for a moment. Then, she used to say that the right people come at the right time, that you don't always recognize them at first because they don't look the way you expected. Smart woman, Marcus said. She was. Eli looked at him, the serious, too old eyes. You stayed, he said. You could have left me at the hospital and it wasn't your problem anymore, but you stayed. Yeah. She used to say that's how you knew. Not what people said, but what they did when they didn't have to. Marcus sat with that. What do you need to tell me, Eli? He asked. The boy reached into the pocket of the jeans Walter had brought him, his own clothes from home, something familiar in the strangeness of the compound. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it and held it flat on his palm, tilting it toward the garage light. It was a photograph, a printout, small, slightly blurred, taken from what appeared to be security camera footage. In it, 2 men were standing together in what looked like a private parking structure. One of them was Richard Hartwell, unmistakable, his face a fixture of business magazine covers. The other man Marcus didn't recognize. But between them, visible in Hartwell's hand, were papers, and the other man was handing him something, a small case, the kind of case that held drives or documents. My mom printed this, Eli said. The night before she died. She printed it and she put it in my jacket pocket and she said, keep this, Eli, keep it safe. Don't show it to anyone from Mr. Hartwell's office or anyone who works for him or anyone he might know. and she made me promise. Marcus looked at the photograph. Do you know who the other man is? No, Eli said, but Mom wrote something on the back. Marcus turned the paper over. Written in a careful hand, clearly a name and a string of numbers. Kessler. Account HG/04. Transfer auth RH personal. Serena Voss had photographed the proof. She had captured Hartwell personally authorizing a transfer. She had printed it and hidden it in her child's jacket because she knew what was coming, and she had trusted the only person she was sure would protect it. A 7-year-old boy. Marcus looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he looked at Eli. You kept this the whole time, he said. Through the highway, through the hospital, through everything. I promised, Eli said simply. Marcus felt something happen in his chest that he didn't have a name for. Some compound thing, awe and grief and determination, and something that felt ancient and simple, and like the reason any of them did any of this. Eli, he said, this is going to help us. This is going to help your father. The boy's expression shifted, cautious, hopeful, terrified of hopping too much. My dad's in prison. For now, Marcus said, not forever. Ghost identified the name within 2 hours. Kessler, Werner Kessler, deputy director of an agency whose connection to Hartwell's defense subsidiary was documented in the files Serena had been building. A government official, a sanctioned information transfer. The photograph showed Hartwell personally receiving materials from a government official while simultaneously authorizing a financial transfer. It was not just evidence. It was a smoking gun and the hand holding it. This changes everything, Ghost said. Get it to the journalist, Marcus said, tonight. The journalist was a woman named Diane Park, 50 years old, who worked for a financial crimes publication that had broken 4 major corporate fraud stories in the previous decade. She was known, Ghost had confirmed this through research, for 2 things: methodical verification and an absolute refusal to be intimidated. She had been subpoenaed 3 times and had not given up a source in 30 years. Ghost sent her an encrypted file, 300 pages of reconstructed financial documentation, the photograph, the account numbers, the transfer authorization. And then Marcus did something else. He called a number that Ghost had found for him, the direct line of the federal prosecutor assigned to the Carver case. Not the current prosecutor, who had been assigned 6 months ago and had made no progress. The original prosecutor, who had been quietly removed from the case 9 months earlier. A woman named Jennifer Castillo who had left the DOJ under circumstances her former colleagues described, off the record, as pressure from above. She answered on the 3rd ring. Ms. Castillo, Marcus said, my name is Marcus Donovan. I have documentation of the fraud that got your case taken away from you. I have a photograph of Richard Hartwell personally authorizing illegal transfers to a foreign official. And I have a 7-year-old boy whose mother died to protect this evidence. He paused. Are you still interested? A long silence. Yes, Jennifer Castillo said. I'm still interested. The next 48 hours were the most dangerous of Marcus's life. Hartwell's people knew they were running out of time. Whether from a leak or from monitoring communications or simply from the pattern of events accelerating, someone in Hartwell's security apparatus had calculated that containment was no longer possible and had moved to escalation. The first attack came at night. 3 vehicles appeared outside the compound simultaneously, which told Marcus it was coordinated, not opportunistic. Clint's people were ready. The compound had been on alert status since the first SUV passed by. Nobody got through the gate. But one of the club's outer properties, a storage unit where Ghost and Priest had been working, was hit. They got out. They got the drives out. But it was close enough that Priest came back with a cut across his forearm that needed 8 stitches and an expression that suggested anyone who wanted to try that again would have a significantly worse outcome. The second escalation was legal, or the appearance of legal. An emergency custody motion was filed in Sacramento County Court, under Hartwell's legal team's signature, claiming that Eli was being held by a known criminal organization against his will. The filing was accompanied by a declaration signed by Thomas Reed, the county coordinator who had visited the hospital, claiming that he had witnessed Marcus coerce the child. Marcus called Jennifer Castillo. "I need a federal injunction," he said, "or the equivalent, something that freezes the custody motion until the criminal investigation is initiated." "That's not how it works exactly," Castillo said, "but I know a federal judge who is going to be very interested in this documentation. Can you get me the originals?" "Where?" She named a federal courthouse in Sacramento. "Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., I'll be there. Bring the drives, bring the photograph, bring the boy's grandfather, and Marcus," she paused, "bring whoever you need to make sure you get there." They moved before dawn. Clint assembled a convoy, 12 bikes, Decker's truck, 2 follow vehicles. Not the most subtle operation, but Marcus had long ago learned that in certain situations, visibility was a form of protection. 12 motorcycles moving through a city in formation drew eyes. Eyes meant witnesses. Witnesses meant things on camera. Eli rode in the truck with Walter Decker driving. Marcus rode at the front. They moved through Sacramento in the early morning dark, the sound of the convoy rolling through the sleeping streets like something inevitable. Marcus rode with both hands steady on the bars, watching the road ahead, watching the mirrors, watching everything. One vehicle tried to intercept them on the 50 interchange. Black, no plates, moved aggressively toward Decker's truck before 2 of Clint's riders boxed it to the shoulder, with a precision that came from 20 years of understanding motorcycles as instruments of spatial control. The vehicle stopped. Nobody in it got out. They arrived at the federal courthouse at 7:52 a.m. Jennifer Castillo was waiting on the steps in a gray suit with a briefcase, and the expression of a woman who had been waiting 9 months for this morning. What happened next took weeks, not hours. That's how it works in reality, not with a single climactic confrontation, but with documentation and filings and testimony, and the grinding machinery of law enforcement and journalism doing what it does when it actually does it. Diane Park's story ran 6 days after Marcus's call. Not a complete story, a first one, the kind that opens a crack in a wall. Hartwell Global, questions over defense contract payments. Detailed, sourced, cautious enough to survive legal challenge, specific enough to draw blood. The DOJ opened a formal investigation within 48 hours of the story running. James Carver's lawyers filed an emergency motion based on new evidence. Jennifer Castillo submitted her own affidavit as a witness to prosecutorial interference. A federal judge granted an expedited review. 3 weeks after Marcus found a boy in the rain, Carver's case was reopened. 8 weeks after that, Richard Hartwell was indicted. 15 counts. Wire fraud, conspiracy, violations of the Arms Export Control Act, obstruction of justice, and the one that Marcus had pushed for specifically, the one that Jennifer Castillo had filed with particular care, conspiracy in connection with the death of Serena Voss. The Hartwell Global headquarters in San Francisco became a media siege. The stock collapsed. 3 board members resigned. The defense subsidiary was immediately suspended from all government contracts pending investigation. Thomas Reed, the county coordinator, cooperated with federal investigators in exchange for reduced charges. His testimony confirmed what Marcus had suspected, that Hartwell's legal team had specifically targeted the child welfare system to retrieve Eli. Werner Kessler was arrested at his home in Arlington, Virginia. Marcus heard about the indictment from Ghost, who called him at 6 in the morning and said simply, "It happened." Marcus was sitting in the compound yard with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise. He sat with the news for a moment, and then he said, "Okay," and hung up and watched the sun come up. Eli was in Sacramento with his grandfather. Walter Voss had found a small rental apartment near the child's old school so that Eli could return to something familiar while the legal processes worked their way forward. Marcus had visited twice. The second time, Eli had showed him a drawing he'd made in school, a motorcycle, large and somewhat abstract, with two figures on it, a big one and a small one. "Is that supposed to be us?" Marcus asked. "You said maybe you'd take me for a ride sometime," Eli said, "when things were normal." "I said that. In the hospital, you said maybe someday." Marcus looked at the drawing. The big figure had something written across its back, a child's attempt at block letters, Eagle. "I did say that," he said. "Is it a promise?" Marcus was not a man who made promises carelessly. He'd learned early that promises were a form of debt, and debts accumulated, and at some point they collapsed under their own weight. He'd made very few promises in his life. The ones he'd made, he'd kept. He looked at the boy. Eli, who had survived a highway in the rain, who had carried a photograph in his jacket through a hospital and a compound and a federal courthouse, who had kept a promise his mother had asked him to keep even when he was alone and terrified, and had no reason to trust anyone. "Yeah," Marcus said, "it's a promise." The day James Carver walked out of federal prison was a Tuesday in early November. The charges against him had been formally vacated 3 days earlier. His sentence was commuted based on the new evidence and the evidence of prosecutorial misconduct. The judges didn't always move fast, but when the case was this clear, they moved. Marcus wasn't there for the release. That wasn't his moment. That was a moment for Eli and for Walter, and for a man who'd spent 16 months imprisoned for something he'd tried to stop. Marcus had no place in that circle. He was at the compound when Ghost called to tell him it had happened. He sat for a while. He thought about Eddie, about the grave in the dry California ground. He thought about his own father, Thomas Donovan, whose name was now part of a federal investigation, whose involvement Marcus was still trying to understand completely. There had been a period some years back when his father had apparently been entangled with Hartwell's people, not as a knowing participant in the fraud Ghost had determined, but as someone whose accounts had been used, whose identity had been borrowed, possibly without full understanding of what was happening. A man who'd been used and discarded, a pattern Marcus recognized. He thought about the first night, the highway, the rain, the child in the gravel. He thought about what it meant that he'd been the one to find him. He didn't know if it meant anything beyond the random mechanics of a man on a road in a storm. But he had learned something in the weeks since, that the connections between people ran longer and deeper than you could see from the surface, that a thread pulled in one place unraveled patterns in places you couldn't anticipate, and that sometimes the most important thing a person could do was simply stop and look when something caught their eye on a dark road. Simply stop. Simply look. Simply act. 2 weeks after Carver's release, Marcus pulled his bike into the parking lot of a park on the eastern edge of Sacramento. The day was clear and cold, the sky a hard November blue that made everything look precise and permanent. Walter Voss was there with a thermos of coffee. James Carver was there, thinner than his photographs, quieter, the particular quietness of a man who has been through something that reshaped him. And Eli was there, running across the dead grass of the park with the total physical commitment that children bring to running, which is to say, running like it's the only thing. When he saw the bike pull in, he stopped running and turned. Marcus climbed off, kicked the stand down, pulled off his helmet. Eli walked toward him, then faster. Then he was running again, this time directly at Marcus, who caught him with both arms the way he'd caught him in a different way on a different night, in the rain on the highway, when none of them had known what the other was or what they were going to become to each other. The boy held on. Marcus held back. "You came," Eli said, his voice slightly muffled against Marcus's cut. "I told you I would." You also told me I could have a ride. Did I set a date for that? Today seems good, Eli said. Marcus looked over the boy's head at Walter Voss, who was watching with an expression that was past crying and into something simpler and older. He looked at James Carver, who looked back with the eyes of a man who didn't have the words yet for what needed to be said, but who knew they would come eventually. Marcus looked down at Eli. You know the rules, he said. Helmet, both hands on the tank, don't lean. I know, Eli said. You told me in the hospital. I told you in the hospital that I'd explain the rules if we ever did it. I didn't tell you the rules themselves. I figured them out, Eli said. Marcus looked at him for a moment. The serious eyes, the slight tilt of the chin upward, the look of a child who pays attention and has always paid attention and will, when he grows up, become someone who is very difficult to fool. Yeah, Marcus said, I bet you did. He put his helmet on Eli's head. It was comically large, falling over his ears. Eli pushed it back with both hands to see properly. Marcus adjusted it, found a chin strap that would hold. They rode. Just through the park road, slow enough that it barely qualified, fast enough that it qualified completely. The November air was cold and the sky was enormous above them, and the engine sound was the sound that Marcus had grown up with not as a child, but as himself, the person he'd made out of the materials available to him, the best person he could make with what he'd had to work with. He felt the boy's grip on the tank, steady, trusting, the grip of someone who knew they were held. Marcus had carried loss for a long time. He would carry it still, Eddie under the ground, his father's complicated ghost, the years he'd spent going fast in a straight line away from anything that required him to stay. He didn't imagine that one boy on a rainy highway had solved any of that. He was not a man given to the kind of sentiment that produced easy redemptions. But he thought, as they moved through the cold, clear November morning, that this was something, that this small pair of hands on the tank was something, that the choice to stop on a dark road, to reach toward a shape in the rain, to stay when staying was difficult and dangerous and asked everything of him, that this was not nothing, that this was, in fact, the most important thing he had done. He didn't know where any of it went from here. He wasn't built for predictions. He was built for the next mile and then the one after that. But the boy was with his grandfather and his father and the people who would take care of him. And the man who had hurt all of them was going to prison. And for right now, in this moment on this road, that was enough. He rode. The most dangerous people in a corrupt world are not the ones with weapons. They are the ones who stop on dark roads in the rain and refuse to keep going until they understand what they've found.